to have an informal chat about video games and learning and what role video games will play in the future of education. So, what I started wondering, what occurred to me when you gave your talk keynote today is that schools are, many people remember the big G, the little G games in school, but many people are missing the big G picture. We don't just view games very isolated. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that that's a mistake we've made in school for a long time, especially in America. We did it with textbooks, right? So the textbook, and there's research on this, is the least successful educational tool ever designed. And I mean there's empirical research on that. That's not just a claim. And why? Because we tried to have one tool to do everything. It doesn't work. So then we come along with a new tool like games, and we say, well, let's let it act all by itself. But as I said, in America, we have really deprofessionalized teachers. We want them controlled by politicians or schools of education or ideologues on school reform. But teachers are, with all the technologies we have, augmented reality and video games and simulations and all sorts of apps, plus lots of activities that we can do in the real world, not even just in the room, we can get out and do. They have to become orchestrators and system builders and designers. And what strikes me is the design principles for good learning are just the design principles for good gaming. But often we miss the fact that gaming is not just software, it's an activity, and for modern gamers it's a social activity, but it's also a knowledge building activity. There's always a certain percentage of gamers who want to get on the internet with others to make knowledge, mod the game, criticize the game, get into contact with the designers and tell them how much a better job they could have done. And that wanting to be a maker, producer, and not just consumer is really important to the 21st century. And it's done today as everyday people organize themselves to learn and teach. And often they do it around a game, but they can do it around anything. So that's what schools today have to compete with. We have to let kids get into well-organized learning and teaching systems where they are making and not just consuming. They are sometimes teaching, not just learning. And at the same time, there is an orchestrator, there is a designer, and that is the teacher. We don't want to get rid of that. A lot of people in America want to use games and artificial tutors to get rid of the teachers, right? It's cheap. That's something we do not want to do.
Is that, and yet we have this, like you said, we have this insistence on introducing games that are explicitly made for learning and kind of ignoring the benefit that commercial games can have. Why do you think this is, that games must be created with explicit instruction in mind?
Again, it's the model. So what's surprising is the biggest publisher in the world for school stuff is a company named Pearson, which you may or may not have heard of, but they're very big. And so, they sell books, right? And they know as digital apps come and digital books and games come down the line, they could be out of business. So what do? They say, okay, we're going to make games. And what are they going to make? They're going to make games to do the very same thing they already do, skill and drill, right? They're just going to package their own curriculum to do the same thing in a spiffier format so they can stay in business. And they're a very large, company, so they have a great deal of power. But we live in a world in which, getting a bunch of facts, being good at skill and drill isn't going to do your kid any good. They're going to have to think about very complex matters in very complex worlds. Commercial games are about it. A game is a problem space. You can make it about anything. One of my favorite games, Chibi Robo, is about a house cleaning robot. If you could make an entertaining game about cleaning a house and you're 4 inches tall, you can make it about anything. But as you know, we're in an exciting time in the commercial game industry where, thanks to the downloadable services where you can download a game from Xbox or PlayStation 4 or Steam, has opened up an independent industry. That is, no longer do you have to go through the big publishers. And this is now opening up a whole new genre. We've seen just the bare beginning of it. We're going to begin to see games for every games as poetry, games as science, every possible thing. And that division between commercial, which actually means blockbuster entertainment in America, and other uses is just going to disappear. I think the other thing that we've discovered after making a lot of bad games for school is a good game's a good game. So if you take Dragon Box, it's not good because it teaches algebra well. It's good because it's a good game, right? You can play it and get a lot out of it. It's a commercial game in every possible way, but it also happens to have chosen a beautiful set of problems that we think kids should get. So games like Rapture or Gone Home or many more, Braid, many others are really breaking boundaries of what games are going to be, and we haven't even seen the bare beginning of it.
Is this a sign of that the video game medium is maturing, you think?
Yes, and it matured late, because if you think of the film industry, the independent film industry existed pretty early, right? And of course, that's where innovation happened. For a long time, the big publishers, Microsoft, EA, and stuff, controlled access to the game market, made games for millions upon millions of dollars, and without that access, you couldn't make a game. So the independent industry really couldn't thrive. Now with the downloadable services you can build a game for $100,000, you can make money. The other thing to say is, with the recent Metal Gear Solid disc came out, made for maybe something like $100 million, the industry finally realizes they've hit the ceiling. That company, it's a spectacular game, and you can play it for thousands of hours, but they sold several million copies out the gate and still made no money, and this is at $60. So that company isn't going to make any more AAA games. We've hit, just like with the movies, we've hit the limit of realism and the limit of money. And what you see in games now is a retreat away from realism, right? Realizing that with good art assets, you can actually do much more powerful things often than using just photorealism.
So I remember reading an article, a blog post from you not long ago, about the importance of that the game mechanics is married to the content.
Right.
Yeah.
See, things like story in games and atmosphere, they're important, they're great, but no gamer lets that ever trump the marriage between the game mechanic and the content. That means, the game mechanic is something you want to do, and when you do it, it's a very effective way to play the game and to solve the problems. That's the heart of gaming. It's the genius to do it. If you get that right and then you add story, you've done something great, but nothing trumps in gaming that marriage.
Yeah, I remember you in an online talk. You said that there's a problem of content, and also you said it's pretty much the same in one of your books. And many games are very focused on content, especially the learning games. How can we move from focusing on content to focus on the experiences that are good for learning?
So content's a word that can mean many different things. It tends to mean in American schools facts and information. But what is the content of physics? See, we think the content of physics is physics facts written in a textbook. But the contents of physics to a physics scholar is the set of problems you solve and the tools you use to do it, right? Some of those tools are information. Physics is not a body of facts. It is a body of activities to solve problems. Civics should not be a body of facts about government. It should be a set of tools to solve problems as a citizen, right? So the content of school should be the activities and problems and tools to solve problems. Now, the content of a game are problems, and yet they're given good tools to solve them. In that sense, games have content. They don't have content in the sense of they're just about a bunch of facts and information, but nothing should be about that.
No.
So games are very clearly about doing, but physics is very clearly about doing.
Do we have a kind of literacy crisis almost in our education, that we focus too much on content and not enough about on literacy?
We have a crisis, at least in the United States, where I think our schools more and more exist to serve the inequality we have. Right? We have a 1% who is now in 2016 will own half of all the wealth in the country. And we have also really vitiated jobs. We've gotten rid of unions, living wages, benefits. That's, you're not going to be able to do that and educate your people, right? If you give a genuine education of the sort that I talked about today, where people understand systems, they can think for themselves, they can get and organize their own learning, they wouldn't put up with that. So I actually think many of our public schools, we have some very, very wealthy schools for the rich that are excellent, but by and large, our public school system is there to dupe people. To say, okay, you pass this test, you're smart, you'll get a job. No, you won't get a job. 40% of our college graduates either don't have a job or have a job that didn't require a college degree. But I don't think our power brokers really want us to educate deeply. I don't think we're trying to do something and failing at it. I think we're trying to do something and succeeding at it, which is keeping a lot of the population stupid. And if you guys, you don't have Fox News, but if you ever can watch Fox News and you want to see endless stupidity, watch it. Do you know there is research that shows the longer you watch Fox News, the less you know. It actually subtracts from your knowledge. That's a real piece of research.
That's interesting. So what would you say to the teacher that is concerned about a video game introduced in school not teaching content, not being about facts and not...
Well, a video game, if content really should mean the set of activities and tools with which people solve certain sorts of problems, so physics problems, chemistry, literary criticism, interpretive problems, right? If that's what content means and not facts, there couldn't be a video game without content, right? Because they're about problems. The trouble is there can be textbooks with no content. They're just facts and information. There's no activities. There is no tools. You know, a physicist who only could recite the textbook isn't going to get tenure. He's got to be able to solve a problem and not one everybody else has solved. So I called it, the idea that content is a bunch of set of facts everybody should know, the content fetish. What American policy says, look, if you want to teach science, you make some standards and you should teach every American, you should ask yourself, what should every American know about science? Right? And then that's what we should teach. All Americans, what is the thing they should all know? Let's teach it. That's how we design the books. It succeeds wonderfully. All Americans do know the same thing about science, which is absolutely nothing. And in this day and age, really what you have to do, because there's so much knowledge that changes so fast, you have to say, let's give every kid in math or science the experience to learn something, not necessarily the same thing, at a very deep level. So they understand, how does this really work? And how do I prepare myself to learn more in this area if I have to in the future? How do I come to understand why this is important, right? And then you might learn something different from me. The next stage would be, let's get a problem on the table that requires what you learned and requires what I learned and requires what he learned to solve a joint problem, right? Because that's how people in the modern world work. They like a World of Warcraft hunting party, they put different skills together to solve a problem that can't be solved by any one discipline. Now, in that setting, not every American would know the same things, but they would know something, and they would be prepared to collaborate to actually solve problems. And then we wouldn't have the society we had. We've had a decent one.
Let's hope so. Is it time for questions?
I don't know.
I'm asking Jørgen.
Oh.
He's standing with the microphone.
Hi, my name is Rosalind Barendrecht and I'm a PhD student here at the University of Bergen. And I'm wondering, all the things you're saying about the games, it makes so much sense. But if schools still have to test the students in a way for, I don't know, from government, level, how does it match? Or how can we change the government more?
Right. I mean, this is, of course, a key problem in America. I mean, because first of all, you have a relatively trustworthy government. But we have a system that imposes standards and really stupid tests on kids, and they take them all the time, and it takes away from quality instruction. The teachers hate it. There is now a huge backlash against it from parents, where parents and kids are opting out of the tests, refusing to take them. And just 2 days ago, Obama finally admitted, we got to stop doing this, right? There is always going to be a conflict between the top and the people doing the job on the ground, right? You are preparing kids for the world that's about to be there, right? And the top is a set of standards and institutions that are always 20, 30 years behind, or are trying to prepare people, for jobs, right? The corporations need jobs. We need service workers. Supposedly we need programmers. That isn't actually true, but supposedly we need programmers. But as you see, and now if you realize we can't even know the jobs that your kids are going to do, it could be a wildly different set of jobs. Then we got to think, well, what sort of person do I need to produce? What sort of skills to be resilient and flexible and intelligent and prepared for future learning all their lifetime? So you know that on the ground. How you convince the stakeholders at the top, who have more interest than just this kid learning, right? They have interests of control, interests of selling things, interests of a society being standardized. That tension is always there. We have it just really hugely because we have a quite disorganized and fractious society. But one of the things that's certainly true in the Nordic countries is you have hit on some very good forms of government and caring about people, but you're in a global world feeling all sorts of forces telling you, you should start to engage in casino capitalism, you should start to value inequality, you should undervalue the social nets that create commonality. And you just need a day in Detroit to see what you're going to get if you do that. There's the one way back there.
Hello, I'm Magnus. I'm also been a teacher for many years and done a lot of game-based activities. And I would like to, I don't know if it's a question or something, I would like you to comment, but there's a lot of talk about what we can learn from games. But I've gradually started to be more interested in learning the games. Like to teach the game or to develop an understanding of the game as a game and not really pull out any big lectures or big things. It's
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Look, if a game is teaching a problem set, right? And when the game is very well designed, you are guaranteed that the person knows how to solve those problems by the fact they finished it, right? So I often say, look, if you played Halo on hard, and which is very hard, and you finished it, would you be tempted to give that person a Halo test? Of course not. He just proved he can do it. So why, when we have a kid taking algebra for 12 weeks, do we then want to have a test at the end to see if he learned algebra? It's because we don't think the algebra was as well designed as the game. So I agree with you, not just with games. We want to build learning systems, whether it's a game or not, that are so well designed in terms of levels and support and tools that the very act of doing them and finishing them is already the assessment. Another way to put this is assessment and learning become exactly the same thing. And the fact is, games show us we can do that. And if we turn teachers loose with real responsibility and autonomy and make them designers, they will do that. Then we won't need a government to come along and say, did you waste these kids' time or not?
Hello, I'm Alexander from Norway Upper Secondary School. Now, Professor Gee, you're very critical to the state of American public education as of today. If you were to look into your crystal ball and say something about how will American public education be 5, 10, 20 years from now, do we have anything to be optimistic about, or is everything going off the cliff?
No, we don't have anything to be optimistic about. You know, I think, first of all, let me say something. American schools at one point in history did an amazing job. After World War II, Americans, for the first time in their history, decided to educate everybody. That is, African Americans, minorities, poor people. Before, we didn't care. And at that point, we said, no, we're going to now demand that all those people get an education. Those people didn't used to go to college. They didn't take the SAT. And in the years after the war, in the 50s and 60s, of course, as these populations began to get schooled and began to take the SAT and go to college, they did very poorly. And then a few years later, they did pretty well. And it was because our teachers, our schools, did an amazing job to do that. Now, however, as I've said, we all say that the schools are failing, but they are really, the biggest category of worker in America are poorly paid service workers. The biggest employer is Walmart. But by the way, Walmart may soon go out of business because of its competition with Amazon, right? That's what I meant by change. So if you see that our schools are stratified so that we have private schools or suburban, rich public schools where the wealthy go, and are using a lot of what we're talking about, and they're good schools. I mean, they're preparing the kids for the top positions, of which there are not that many, right? Because modern work is an hourglass. A smallish number of very good positions that require a lot of experience and training, and a large number of not very good positions in the service work or in other sectors like that, and then a few in the middle. If our public school system for the normal people, which is most of us, is there to produce service workers. And then there's, a strata that teaches very differently, and it passes all the tests anyway, it doesn't matter. And they're there to produce what people would call, what was called symbol analysts, people who are going to manipulate information, people who are going to manipulate innovation. And if you see it that way, the schools are very successful. So the answer to your question would be not whether the schools could change, but whether the society would will something different. See, would the society say, I don't want 99% of the people to have nothing. I don't want 99% of the people in a job with no wages, no benefit, no dignity. I don't want a tiny number of people controlling an economy, because then there's no consumption, right? And so, this is one thing that is contentious in America, because I keep saying that you can't engage in school reform without society reform, because our society right now would not tolerate good school, everybody. But that's got to change. And my only optimism is, and this is based even in history, as we get these massive levels of inequality, the highest we've ever had in our country, if you go too far, history shows that when the elites, when the rich push the rest of the society too far, eventually there's a rebellion, eventually there's change. And I think a lot of people in America do feel we're very close to the fact that the people are being pushed too far, in which case all bets are off, that anything could happen, and it could get better.
Hi, is this on? Yeah. Okay. I'm Pernille Vangsholm. I'm a master's student of game technology and artificial intelligence up at the University of Trondheim. And I was wondering if there's one particular subject or area where you feel that this theory is more important, or do you see it as a thing you should be doing across the board from the start?
The theory of learning?
Yes.
And teaching?
In this particular way.
I think it is not germane to, you see, in America, we only right now care about so-called STEM. Do you have this STEM thing here? Science, technology. That's we want. We don't care about art, and we don't care about other stuff. We want everybody to know STEM so they can get a job in a technical job, programming and stuff, for which there won't be any. Think about it. If you made everybody a programmer, how much would programming pay? There isn't a shortage of programmers because India's got plenty and China's got plenty. You can do it on a computer. And much low-level programming isn't paid all that well anyway. So, sort of guaranteeing people saying, you're gonna get a job if you go to college is a non-starter, because we don't know what the future is going to be, and it's quite likely we need artists more than we need programmers. On the other hand, the way that you learn anything deeply, whether it's science, art, or gardening, or carpentry, or video games, is the way that I just sketched out. And part of the evidence for that is, as people have begun to self-organize their own learning, including for citizen science, but everything else, outside of school, this is the way they organize. This is the way what they do. I've told this story before, but this guy named Harry Harlow in the 30s he did a series of experiments on mother love, on the wire. You may not, he showed that if monkey's born and you give it a wire mother or a wire mother with fur on it, and it clings to the mother with fur on it, it grows up to be healthy. But if it clings to the mother with wire, it's neurotic. It was the original sort of studies that you need to be nurtured or you're screwed. But before that, he was one of the big experts on primate intelligence. And he came in, in those days, the way they did primate intelligence is you'd have some sort of puzzle. And the theory was the primate would solve the first part of the puzzle, and there'd be a food reward under it. That would reward him and give him the incentive to go to the second part, and then add another food reward, and then to the third one, the behaviorist theory. And one day, Harry Harlow came into the lab, this is in Wisconsin, and said, we've never actually asked what would the primate do if we gave him the puzzle with no food rewards. And we kind of know what he'd do. He'd just stop. But as a good scientist, we should do it. And he gave the primates the puzzle with no rewards, and they solved it much quicker. Because to primates, and we are primates, learning is an appetite that is as pleasurable as sex. It has to be, because for our survival, if we learned nothing, we wouldn't be here. So the paradox of school is how you made something that is primordially important to humans as sex so unappealing. And I think if you think about it, if we made sex the school curriculum, there would be no children.
Okay, so we have time for, I think, one more short question.
Okay, well, it's good because he started.
You've been waiting, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm Barbara Wasson, professor at University of Bergen and a computer scientist. But I was intrigued by your comment about we don't need programmers, and you started to answer it. But if we look at programming as problem solving, so it's not so much the job of a programmer, but the way of thinking as a programmer, and I guess we'll be talking about that in the coding sessions.
We need problem solvers.
So we need problem solvers, yeah. And
I think in the United States we are selling kids, especially poorer kids, a bill of goods. That if you just learn a programming language, there'll be a nice tech job for you with a living wage. When our tech companies like Microsoft and Apple are casualizing labor so they can avoid even paying benefits.
Yeah.
If you're talking about learning languages, programming languages, other symbol systems as tools for problem solving and metacognition, then I'm all for it. But if you're guaranteeing a job at Apple, you should talk to Apple.
Yeah, because what I was going to just mention, I just came from a conference on big data, and they were promoting what we really need is data scientists and the ability to problem solve, looking at data and using data to help us solve our problems. So it's a little bit refocusing from the programming.
So big data is another heavily hyped thing now, but the trouble with big data is as you get more data, if it gives more noise and less signal, you get dumber. So the key thing is you've got to get more data that makes the signal stronger, not weaker. But it is certainly true that we don't know how to do that yet. People have got this faith, the more I get, the more I'll know. And what's turning out in a lot of areas, the more I get, the less I know. All right, I think we did it.
I think you definitely did it. Thank you so much. Da har vi et par minutters omrigging her oppe. Torgeir, du kan få komme opp og sette maskinen din på scenen. Så da får dere prate litt med sidemannen igjen.